Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. If we can start this afternoon session. I hope you all enjoy the lunch and are ready for another dose of presentations and discussions here in the afternoon. Just technical remark: this panel will be held in English, as you find out. So if you need any headphones, help yourself. It's right over there. So my name is Jan Látal. I'm from Human Rights and Transition Policy Department here at Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I have the pleasure to chair this panel, which is called Support to Democracy in Perspectives from Abroad. Basically, this panel is meant to as an opportunity for experts from the countries in transition or in the region of Eastern Europe, or expert on these countries to provide us with feedback on how they see the democracy promotion which is being undertaken by European Union or the Western countries in general. So we'll be happy to hear their point of views, how this whole topic, which is also an important feature of Czech foreign policy, how they see its efficient and what kind of maybe recommendations they have for us as the European or the donor countries. Therefore, it is my pleasure to welcome three interesting guests here at this panel, representing countries of Moldova, Georgia, and Hungary, respectively. And to start with is Mr. Kornel Ciurea from Viitorul, the Institute for Development and Social Initiative from Moldova. Then we have on my far right Mr. Kornely Kakachia, who is Dean of School of Politics and International Relations in Georgian University of Social Science. And last but not least, it's Mr. László Csicsmann, who's the Dean of Faculty of Social Science at Corvinus University of Budapest, and who's supposed to provide us with a view from Northern Africa or the Middle East in general, which he's an expert of. I won't take any more time for myself, so I'll pass the floor to our distinguished guest. Maybe first of all, I would like to ask you just very briefly to introduce yourself, just so that we have a better idea of the point of view you approach the topic, and then start with the presentation. So Mr. Ciurea, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Cornel Ciurea. I'm representing a Moldovan non-governmental organization, a think tank. I was involved formally in politics, so I have a more political approach usually. And I'm also a political commentator, so I'm condemned to think in political terms. I'm not quite sure how much people here know about Moldova and are interested about Moldova. Moldova is a strange country. It is different, for example, from Georgia, which is a small country but very high-profile country. Its mental dimension is very much different from its real geographic dimension. Moldova is different. And it's different from Ukraine. Ukraine is a big country in European terms, and at the same time it is very high profile. You know, Eastern Summit, they would like to sign the association agreement. We and Georgians would like to just initial the association agreement. So we are in different positions, and we are going to do it, but maybe it will not happen. So we are not sure how successful Eastern Partnership Summit in Vilnius will be. I'm going to tell you two things. One is about how we Moldovans see democracy in our region, and especially in our country, but I would compare it with Georgia and Ukraine. And my main thesis is that this democracy is a bit unconventional one, and it is created internally, but also it is created due to precious advices, funds of Western donors, Western assistance. So it's not just our deal, it's not our opera, it is also your contribution, and that's why I would like to tell you what did we do together in 20 years in our region. And after that, I'll try to be more specific and comment a bit on what Czech Republic is doing in Moldova. Maybe you'll be interested about this, and how we see Czech Republic in my country. So first of all, this unconventional democracy which we created in Eastern Europe, I would like to say that it has several features, which you could understand because you are Czechs, the majority of you, and as in the previous panels one speaker said, post-communists didn't totally disappear from Czech, so we can share and we can understand each other. I would like to say that the main one of the feature of our local democracy, Eastern European democracy, is, many commentators said, a pluralist by default democracy. We have very aggressive politicians who fight each other, but the result usually is democracy because they cannot defeat each other. So it is a natural democracy in a way that it functions like a democracy, but it is an unstable democracy because we are not sure that tomorrow something else could happen. And it starts to happen. You see in Ukraine, Tymoshenko lost the battle and was imprisoned. We don't know what will happen in Georgia with Saakashvili. Still, Moldova acts according to this principle, pluralist by default. Nobody is staying in prison, nobody is jailed. Opposition is respected. So the power and oppositions are roughly equal, of equal side, and cannot defeat each other. Europeans started to see that the balance of power is disappearing in some parts of Eastern Europe. So the second feature of our democracy is that we are an assisted democracy. Europeans, Western donors are coming with money, with advices, with values and principles, and they try to tame our democracy. Not to let politicians to defeat each other totally, to respect each other. So this is an attempt which is promoted by promoters of democracy, but sometimes it fails, as we see in Ukraine, and maybe we will see it in Georgia, I don't know. And possibly it will happen in Moldova later. Another feature of our democracy is that this is a quite mysterious feature, but you can understand it, it is an oligarchic democracy. Of course, probably Czech Republic has its own oligarchs. There are oligarchs in Austria, for example, but it's another scale of oligarchy. Our societies are really obsessed by oligarchy and with oligarchs. The whole society hates them, but at the same time it admires them, and it is a big honor to serve them, to receive good salaries. So oligarchy, which is the second generation politicians, is all-embracing in our countries. And we think just in terms of oligarchy, which is also characteristics of our democracy in Moldova. We have our oligarchs in Ukraine, and in Georgia, you know, they are in power. Another important element of our democracy is that, and it's different from theory, it's a non-electoral democracy. Americans prefer to say that we are electoral democracies. That is, the political process is not quite democratic, but at least the elections are more or less fair. In fact, I would say that we are non-electoral democracy, not because the political process before the election is rigged, but because we don't have, and it is specific just for us, we are not sure about the result of elections after the elections, because all of the three countries, Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia, had a kind of color revolutions. So after the elections, the results could be easily revisited and changed. In Georgia, it happened in 2003, in Ukraine in 2004, and in Moldova, it happened silently, but by dismantling and banning the parliament building and the presidency building in 2009. So the elections are no longer the final result in our country. And this is, in a way, silently accepted by Eastern partners and by Western countries too. So there is an open window for revisiting the results after the elections if these results are not convenient, or maybe they are rigged, we never know. And because of this, there is the final element of our democracy. We are a kind of chaotic democracy, democracy of chaos, according to chaos theories, but in which those who promote democracy, who want to be present, must control not stability and order, but must control disorder and instability. Moldova has a very prolonged period of political crisis, Ukrainians too. I think, and different countries have different strategies of controlling this chaos. For example, Russians control several key points. Transnistria, this is a breakaway region, energy policy, and embargo, economic embargo. They have free tools and they use it sporadically, not permanently. I think the big problem of the European Union is that it tries to control instability in our country permanently by making huge efforts to control it on a day-by-day basis. And it is sometimes it's a waste of resources, and it is a bit uncompetitive in comparison with other countries, like Romania, for example, or even the United States. This is about democracy, and what problems have democracy promoters, Western democracy promoters in our country with this kind of unconventional democracy? I think the first problem, what to do with oligarchs? Are they legitimate oligarchs? Are they our bad guys, or are they not our bad guys? So it's a huge dilemma. In fact, the European Association of our countries is promoted by oligarchs, and silently the European Union is accepting this. It's a big discussion. Can thieves, gangsters could be democracy promoters? I don't have an answer on this. Another problem is, of course, rule of law versus economic development. Democracy promoters insist more on the rule of law, and a huge number of funds are coming in that direction. But we are skeptical regarding the efficiency of this kind or type of attitude, because the oligarchs are still in power, they are not punished, and the economic situation is quite poor. A good sign of this, okay, I'll come later to this. Another problem is the fact that there is a constant dilemma between politicization, which is the attempt of our political elite to have a very political life, and depoliticization, which is trying to do European Union. The European Union is promoting values and principles and try to keep calm our politicians. Please don't be at odds, don't be angry to each other. Unfortunately, it didn't work. And our political life is a constant cycle of periods of normalcy, which is right now because we have a Vilnius summit, and period of abnormalcy or crisis periods. And this period of crisis sometimes are dependent on what is happening with European Union and European Union policy. For example, in 2014, a big crisis, political crisis led to the dismissal of our government and to the dismantling of our coalition, and it happened just after the moment when the European Union declared to our politicians that European Union is not going to sign the association agreement with us, but only to initial. Of course, there is not a direct link between these two facts, but our political commentators prefer to think about this as a link, as a direct link. And of course, one big problem for democracy promoters is in this, and for us, of course, in Eastern Europe, is the dilemma between slow transformation and Big Bang approach or very fast integration. It is very much dependent on the Eastern Summit, which is an attempt to integrate rapidly our region. If it will fail, maybe slow transformation will be much more appropriate, but we don't know yet, and probably you don't know too, how this approach will look like. This is all about democracy in Eastern Europe and in Moldova particularly, and I would like just to tell you that Czech Republic is quite present in our country. In monetary terms, in terms of bilateral help, it gives more than all the other Visegrad countries, even more than Poland. It is not reflected in visibility as such. I would say that Czech presence is a kind of discrete presence in our country. It is a kind of mismatch between the funds allocated and the visibility. But I would say that this discrete presence is not necessarily a negative factor. You know, if you don't know exactly what to do in a region, it's much better not to do. It's a kind of rational approach. And there is one big if, which I would like to say, if Eastern Partnership Summit in Vilnius will be successful, so it will be quite okay for the region and for the countries. But if it will fail, so perhaps this discrete strategy of Czech Republic will be justified, because you were not so involved as other countries, which would be, in a way, forced somehow to be responsible for this possible, I hope that it will not happen, failure. Thank you very much. I am finishing this.
Okay, so thank you, Kornel, for your interesting initial presentation. I think I will directly pass the floor to Kornely, Kakachia, over there.
First of all, I actually prepared some kind of presentation, which I found kind of very long. But when organizers actually asked me about the question, what is Czech Republic actually doing and how is it presented in Georgia, it was kind of puzzling, because we as Georgians more care about what the United States think and what they do in Georgia or European Union, but not as a even though the Czech Republic is a full member of EU, not as contribution as a small country like Czech Republic. And so it was kind of challenging even for me. What I found that I actually went and I found this is actually the goals and priorities of Czech Republic in Georgia according to the Czech embassy. So if you follow this, most of these goals are quite realistic, and even though there is a sentence here, the development of economic trade relations, though we have a very close and very good political cooperation, I think the economy, there's some kind of mismatch between the economy. I think there's a lot of things could be done to improve that. Generally, we talk here about the visibility of the Czech Republic in other countries in the morning session. So I think, to say frankly, in Georgia, as my colleague in Moldova said, Czech presence is invisible. It doesn't mean that they don't really do anything, but if you compare to other so-called friends of Georgia, like especially Poland and Baltic states, they became recently kind of actors in Georgia. They have their own program. They actually very much involved in many issues, including defense, security, civil society. So in that sense, it was always puzzling why Czech Republic actually is somewhere in the shadow. It doesn't mean the Czech Republic doesn't support this idea, and I know that they support, but for instance, if you look this Eastern Partnership, you know, the countries who initiated it, I mean, you see there's a visibility and very active involvement from Sweden and Poland especially, and then Baltic states. And Czechs just, this is a vision from Georgia, they just follow this. But I think in reality, Czech Republic can probably do more, especially since you have a lot of things to offer to the countries like Georgia and post-Soviet countries, especially with the reforms and economical reforms especially. I think in that sense, you know, it should be interesting what is Czech Republic actually doing in Georgia. And in this slide you have exactly the data, actually how much you know, funds we have spent for Georgia. And to say frankly, you know, Western assistance for Georgia is important, including Czech assistance, because we should not forget that Georgia is not member of any post-Soviet organization anymore. It's not member of the CIS, it's not member of Customs Union, so country is, in order to somehow avoid the isolation, country needs really support from international community. In that sense, I think the Czech presidency are really appreciated, and you can see that there was a lot of projects mainly in social and healthcare, education, agriculture, environment, and some other, you know, microcredit support, and some other, and especially the help with IDPs, which we had actually after the Russian-Georgia war in 2008. So here actually I tried to answer the questions. What are the strengths and weaknesses supporting the development of democracy? Basically, the biggest problem in Georgia is that even though Georgia is not as you most probably, most of you already know, it's not a full-fledged democracy, it's just aspiring democracy, and we don't know what will be the end result of this. And Georgia still needs the biggest trouble, even though Georgia did quite good last 9 years in some aspects, especially after the Rose Revolution. There was a very successful police reform, public security, and some other reforms, which I would say even exemplary. But there's still a lot of room to improvements. Especially the greater challenge for Georgia, even today, is a judicial reform and greater self-government reforms, and also the investment climate. One of the issues also which could be interesting is which became actually very visible after the peaceful change of the government, which we had last year. So it was first time in Georgian history that we actually changed government peacefully. So I think in that sense, it was really good precedent for the country. And recently, as you know, we had a presidential election, which also was one of the probably like democratic in recent Georgian history. I think, but fortunately, what we see after the change of regime, that there's some kind of visible human rights problem, especially related to the religion minority and some other issues, which was not really visible last 9 years. So which could be really kind of challenge for the country. Georgia also requires some help with to promote the tolerancy, even though it's historically, I mean, claims to be the tolerant country. I think there's still a lot of should be done, and also to support the pluralistic political culture. Just to take one example, just we had a presidential election, we had an unprecedented number of presidents, almost like 23 person, and 9 out of the 23 claimed that if I didn't win this election is not valid. So you can claim, you can understand what kind of political culture we operating in that sense. Also, there's a serious problem where we can have some kind of help from the Czech Republic, and I know that there's a lot of exchange programs between Czech universities and Georgian universities, but I think it's only one way. I mean, mostly Georgian universities, they study here in Charles and some other, Brno, I think, as far as I know, some of my students. But I think there's a lot can be done in order to promote some kind of joint programs, joint MA programs, joint, I don't know, even PhD program, because I think the Czech Republic is positioned to really help in this sector, Georgia, and you have a quite successful education system in this thing. Here, actually, in this slide, I actually highlighted what Czech Republic can do. I mean, this is from Georgian perspective. I'm not claiming that, you know, I've just highlighted whatever. Some of them can be done, some of them not really. I think some of them, I think interparliamentary friendship group, I think it exists, but I think it really needs to be probably like beef up, especially after the change of the government, because to say frankly, most of the Eastern European countries, they were much well equipped to deal with the previous government than with new government. So I think we need to change probably this also here. And also, I think what we really need is more exchange and experience and best practices. And I think in this sense, Czech Republic is role model. And as you know, Georgia is actually trying to model itself as an Eastern European country, even though, I mean, from Czech perspective, it sounds maybe a little bit strange, but if you just look to the Georgia last 9-10 years, it wants somehow disassociate itself from Russia. That's visible, and also interestingly, it won't disassociate itself from the region. So in region, I mean the South Caucasus, because basically Georgians, as you know, we are kind of impatient, so we don't want to really wait until Azeri and Armenians, they solve the problem over Nagorno-Karabakh. So this creates a problem because South Caucasus, as we have it, it's a kind of failed region. So even though European Union promotes it as a region, it's not there. Because of this, Georgia is trying somehow to stick itself to the Black Sea identity and Black Sea regional cooperation. That's why we had this some kind of modeling. Georgia tries to somehow have a much closer relations with Ukraine and Moldova recently after the changes in Moldova. So that explains. And in long run, it wants somehow to model Eastern European successful societies like Baltic states, Czech Republic. So I think in that sense, there's a lot of things which Czech Republic can share with this country. And there's also a lot of things. There was actually talk this morning that, this is not really much fruitful to help the NGOs. I think in Georgian perspective, it's not really true, because what happened in Georgian reality is that after the Rose Revolution, we had very vibrant, you may be surprised, but under Shevardnadze, we had very vibrant civil society. But what happened that after the Rose Revolution, all these civil society leaders became politicians. They became ministers, they became deputy ministers. And suddenly the West decided that, okay, since our guys, I mean, who we actually help, and these are, kind of established Democrats, so we don't really need to help civil society. So basically what happened that there was, cut of the funds for civil society, which actually did very bad things for Georgian civil society. As a result, what happened that, most of the donors, they try to help the government directly, and they just underfund the civil society. So as a result, we have now 5 or 6 visible civil society, I mean NGOs or NGOs and watchdog organization, even though on the paper we may have 200. So I think in that sense, there's still some role there for European Union to help the civil society, because especially there's what is lacking is to especially there's a lack of think tanks. Like if you look at any Eastern European think tanks, they produce you know, a lot of papers, policy analysis, I don't know, reports. But in Georgian perspective, you have 2 or 3 somehow visible think tanks, but to say frankly, they don't produce much. They're just mostly involved in trainings, which is actually counterproductive. And I think there's a need to help this kind of organization, especially I know that in Czech Republic, in Eastern Europe, you have quite developed think tanks, and they should be able to somehow help to this sector as well. And also, I already said about the education plans. I mean, there could be a lot of other things like organized summer camps, winter camps, because to say frankly, people-to-people contact is missing. I mean, of course, a lot of Georgians, they come here, but less Czech citizens I've seen there, maybe few of them. So, but I think in long run, if we really want to improve some relationships, I think there should be a lot of exchange among them, especially young leaders from both countries. And of course, there is some kind of limitations also, which is there. So, and Czech Republic cannot really change things. One of the limitations is the country still has an authoritarian legacy, and Georgia is known as also having a very traditional mentality and strong nationalistic sentiment, which of course remains one of the problematic issue for transition towards democracy. And I think we should not underestimate this. And also another problem which we have there, we have quite strong Georgian Orthodox Church, and if you just look to the recent surveys, it's just enjoys almost like 98% of the support from the society, which is very challenging for to promote democracy and good governance. And also one of the biggest problems, even though Georgia has the most progressive and liberal laws related to the mass media, in fact we have very polarized media, and I think there's a lot of room for improvement, especially the experience from Czech Republic could be really interesting, because we have very polarized. Actually, you don't have you have television or newspapers actually quite they're not censored. You can write pretty much everything you want, but the most difficult problem we have in TV sector, because this sector is dominated by political parties and political elites. Also, I already spoke a little bit about the weak civil society sector, and I think there's a lot must be done, especially right now, because this particular government which came after the election doesn't really have so much experience. So actually, most of the Georgian governments, if you just look to the last 10 years, most of them, they were learning to run the country by doing. So unfortunately, this is again the case right now with the country. So in that sense, I think we still need to support the civil society, which became somehow like disintegrated and kind of shallow recent years. Just very few more things about the contested media pluralism. You can see here that even though Georgia has a not really the worst, ratings in the press freedom if you compare to the other neighbors, but it's still, there's a lot of room for improvement, and I think there can be some kind of help from European Union and including Czech Republic. In conclusion, I would say that, as one of the famous Georgian political scientists said, Georgia is still aspiring democracy. It's not a consolidated one. And I think the international actors, including Czech Republic, can really do a lot to help this country with this painful transition, including we should also not forget that countries, 20% of the countries is still occupied by Russian troops, and I think this is also creates an additional problem for democracy. And sometimes most of the Georgians, they actually we are thinking which one is more important, to build the democratic institutions or first pay attention more to the security issues. I think these two issues are indivisible, and I think sometimes there's some political groups in the Georgian elite, they sometimes misuse it, and I think we really need to support the Georgian democracy in this sense. In conclusion, I just want to say that Georgia has its own, I would say, like lack of democratic institution. But in general, if you see from where Georgia started, it was just one of the corrupt country of the former Soviet Union, and last 9 years. It's just transformed so much, and the main thing now is the main question which we should have: is these reforms which was done under Saakashvili, is it irreversible? For instance, police reforms. Okay, it's clear now the police doesn't take bribes, and this is one of the exemplary probably in the post-Soviet states. But was it? There was a question actually, and I wrote an academic paper on this. That there's a two approach. I mean, why this police reform was successful in Georgia? It was like because elites actually decided to do so and they put a pressure, or it was just demand from the society. I think we will have a probably answer very soon. Probably after 1 year we will see some results. If we'll see that there's some change in Georgian police and they again take, it started to get more corrupted, then probably we will have difficult answers. I think we can talk here about many other issues, but I'll stop here, and I will be more than happy to answer your question later. Thank you.
Thank you, Kornel, very much for this presentation. It was very specific and very much focused on the topic of this panel. So thank you for that. And last but not least, László, Csicsmann. Please, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Many thanks to the organizers for inviting me to deliver a speech in front of such a distinguished audience. It's a great pleasure. And I was asked to draw an overview on the Middle East and North Africa and how to understand the so-called Arab Spring and about the consequences for democratization. So my speech is about to first to put into context what the Arab Spring can mean for us experts. I'm not a politician, so I come from the academia, so that's why I try to be very critical as much as I can. And if just we would like to put the so-called Arab Spring into the context, it seems that this December is the 3rd anniversary of the start of the uprising in Tunisia, which later had a spillover effect in Egypt, Tunisia, and other countries in the region. And what we should mention first, the so-called Arab Spring, I don't like this term. It is important to bear in mind that many experts of Middle East studies do not like to use that word because of its kind of connotation, and especially if we speak about Syria, it's not spring at all this year and last year, so I'm very cautious to use that term. But the Arab Spring marks the end of the so-called exceptionalism theory, because in democratization theory and in area studies focusing on the Middle East, there was a kind of thinking about that region, the so-called Middle East, is exempt from democratization. This is the only region where democratization has not started yet. And we can say that this Arab Spring, it's the end of this theory. But the so-called Arab Spring brings different realities in different Arab countries. In Libya, it was a kind of foreign intervention which helped to topple the Gaddafi regime. In Syria, it's a bloody civil war. It's nothing to do with democratization this day at all. And it was more peaceful in Egypt and Tunisia. It was not peaceful, but more peaceful comparing with Syria, and a kind of regime change with the kind of question mark happened in Egypt and Tunisia. And what is similar, the roots generally similar, because economic roots, political oppression, of course, and lack of empowerment of the youth population, and other things helped to trigger those events which happened mainly in 2011. The youth population is extremely important in those countries. Part of the elite graduated from different universities in Egypt, for example, and they have any kind of vision of the future with a huge rate of unemployment in Egypt, which is around 30%, which is not the official rate. And also what we witness is the growing importance of the Islamist parties. It is not new. We know it from the 1970s that Islamism is an important driving force, political force and social force in the Middle East. But because of the political oppression, it was not possible to deliver an answer to the questions or the problems of the society by Islamists. So if I would like to understand more the Arab Spring, we can find contradictory views on the Arab Spring. The first one was very popular at the very beginning of the uprising in Tunisia. This is the so-called democratic transition theory, which is a kind of parallel with the 1989 regime change in Central and Eastern Europe. And according to this theory, within 1 or 2 years or 10 years or later, but at the end, a fully fledged democracy will be the result of the so-called Arab Spring. Myself, I'm coming from an area studies. I don't like that kind of comparison with our region and with the democratic transition theory, because in a general sense, if you would like to understand the Arab world and the Middle East, a kind of political reforms even started after 1989 in Jordan, for example, or in Egypt too, the Mubarak regime, a kind of small steps toward a more liberalized authoritarian system, but the term democratic transition implies that at some point the end of the process will be a democracy, which is unfortunately not true, and our societies and our history is not similar to the Arab world at all, and also which is not similar is the economic structure, and religion plays a very different role. So it is a kind of unhistorical way to use theories, and I'm very critical to use this theory on the Middle East. The other is I'm also very critical, the so-called Orientalist school, which claims that Arab Islamic culture is not consistent at all with Western values like human rights and democracy. It is also not true, because in theory we can find a kind of consistency between Arab Islamic culture and Western values. For example, several scholars, Arab scholars, mainly living in the West, in Europe and the United States, started to write articles on how Islam, Ciurea principle and other principles can compare with democracy. So on the theoretical level, it is possible to find such kind of consistency among those values. However, in reality, in the Middle East, it is not the reality. It seems that Western values like democracy is not possible to achieve in the short run. Maybe after 100 years, yes, but no, I'm very pessimistic about it. But new kind of approaches. It was Hamid Damashi who wrote a book with the title End of Post-Colonialism. And when I attended an international conference in Cairo, in Egypt, last year, 2012, February, which marked the first anniversary of the so-called Egyptian Revolution, this narrative was the most popular one among Arab participants of that conference, because it says that this is that from that period, we can say that it is the end of the so-called post-colonial world, and a new era started, a new kind of independent thinking of the Arab world started, and not in the framework of a kind of post-colonial approach, because Orientalism and democratic transition theory is part of a kind of post-colonial approach, according to him. In reality, I don't believe too much in that kind of post-colonial theory, but we should say, of course, we should mention that theory as well. And other well-known scholar in the Middle East, Asaf Bayat, mentions kind of revolution, which means reform combined with revolution, which is much more closer to the truth what happened in the Middle East. And I believe, from a political scientist perspective, that the so-called Arab Spring is not democratization, but it's a kind of evolution, a kind of development of a new authoritarian system, which means that a kind of continuation of the old one, which we can clearly see in the case of Egypt after the soft coup d'etat this June, and of course with new players and with civil society, NGOs, and more political openness also. This is very important to say these words. And also, it is also important to emphasize that there is an ongoing power shift in the Middle Eastern region, a kind of shift of the balance of power, which started well before the Arab Spring. It started well before, years before the Arab Spring. And it is a double-sided process, started inside the region, which means that during the 90s, usually three non-Arab regional actors were the most important players: Turkey, Israel, and Iran. And now it seems that there is a kind of Arab renaissance, and Arab countries like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Qatar, among other countries, play a very prominent role in the Middle Eastern political game. And also, there is a kind of power shift from the outside as well, what we call it as the so-called post-American Middle East, which means that the United States is not the most important actor today. It is among the actors, only one actor among the others, which means that the balance of power is much more different than it was years before the Arab Spring, which means that Russia, China, India, the so-called BRIC countries, plays a very prominent role in shaping regional dynamics in the Middle East. And it is very important to bear in mind that question, because if we speak about democratization, their agenda is very much different than our agenda, than the agenda of the US or the European Union, because for China, Russia, this is not the most important thing, that the Middle Eastern countries should turn democracy. So it means there is a limited space for the Western countries to influence the internal transformation. We have some space, of course, but it is very limited space, and we should bear in mind. If we would like to focus from a strategic perspective, how we see European Union see the Arab Spring, is one of the most important questions, which is maybe a first question at all, whether we should prefer democracy over stability or not. Of course, the ideal thing when democracy and stability come together, but unfortunately it seems that most of the European Union itself and the member states themselves usually prefer stability over democracy. It was mentioned, I think in the first or the second panel, which is better in the Middle East, to just quote somebody from the first or second panel, a moderate military regime or a radical Islamist movement which have chosen by the democratic method. And of course, the answer was the moderate military regime, which means that we prefer stability over democracy. And this is a problem that, and that's why I'm very critical about the Western view of the Middle East, that we try to securitize the question of democratization. Of course, because of the geographic proximity of the European Union to the Middle East, we are very close, much more affected than other countries with those problems, refugees, fear of a kind of spillover effect, energy security, and of course there is a fear of growing role of radical Islam and Al-Qaeda, with some point a kind of exaggeration, because Syria is not the same as Egypt. Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood, is not a radical Islamic movement at all today. It was before, but today is not. But Syria is, of course, is very much different, and of course it is important for us. What are the main methods of dealing with the Arab Spring? I mean the Western European Union and US methods. Foreign intervention. It was in the case of Libya, but it was not the case in Syria. Well, if we would like to evaluate the case of Libya, it's the end. It's as the case today. Libya is the security question. Unfortunately, is still there because illegal arms on the hands of many thousands of tribes and tribal illegal armies, and this is a problem. Economic sanctions, which work somehow against, for example, Iran, which is part of the Middle East. It's no very current issue. The ongoing talk on the nuclear issue, which was failed. It was not successful yesterday. An arms embargo, for example, against Syria, diplomatic pressure. Yes, we use diplomatic pressure. For example, Catherine Ashton and the member states and the US diplomacy use diplomatic pressure, different times, different places, and it is very important, we can say. Freeze or economic or military aid. It is, for example, the case with the US-Egyptian relationship, when the US government withheld some part of the aid to Egypt, support of the opposition and civil society. Of course, this is the most important way how to deal with those countries. For example, in Syria, support of the opposition, but unfortunately we don't know in reality who is the opposition really, so this is also a problem. And from the part of the European Union, a kind of new conditionality, launch of new programs. And I'm going to speak not in a detail about the European Union's role in the post-Arab Spring MENA region. It's a kind of complex view on the issue. And unfortunately, as I mentioned before, we have the European Union itself has a limited role in influencing the outcome of the uprising. And it seems that the European Union has learned the lesson that it's not possible to impose democracy, and there is no tailor-made model how to implement democracy in a country. So I think it's a huge experience from the recent transitions that we should support the indigenous democratization from the ground, from the grassroots level, and not to impose any kind of model, because, for example, the so-called so-called Turkish model was very popular to mention the first days of the Arab Spring, but now it seems that nobody uses that kind of model anymore because of one part, for example, about our criticism against Turkey. And the EU started with a new kind of conditionality, which focuses more on economy, to connect economic and democratic transformation, and many specific programs were launched, the so-called Spring Program, which is support for partnership, reform, and inclusive growth, which started in early 2011, which was a program to support the reform movement in the Middle East. However, if you would like to compare those amount of money allocated to the Middle East, comparing with the money offered by Qatar or Saudi Arabia, that we can understand that our financial assets are very limited. Because of the global financial crisis, unfortunately, our financial assets are very limited to help that kind of transformation in the Middle East. For example, Qatar offered $10 billion the first year to the Egyptian government, and we are not it's not for Hungary, not for Czech Republic, and even not for the European Union. It's not possible to afford such kind of amount to allocate to those events. And civil society facility, establishing country task forces and establishing the European Endowment for Democracy, and a kind of new positive conditionality, money market access and mobility. This is the new model of the European Union. However, the limits of our role in the democratization, it is influenced by other regional powers as well, like Saudi Arabia, China, Qatar, and we have limited financial assets. And also, usually, the European Union, we use a kind of functional approach, which is not bad. I mean, to support political parties, civil societies, to deal with elections. However, it seems that we do not possible to have a kind of coherent approach towards the Middle East. And we try to securitize always the process of democratization. And somehow, we don't understand really the public opinion. And what the V4 countries can do, of course, humanitarian assistance is important. It was mentioned before that the Middle East is not the most important part of our foreign policy, neither for the Czech Republic, nor for the V4 countries. But our historical relations are usually good. The so-called linkage theory is a very important question. The question of the support of the State of Israel was raised by many experts today. I don't believe myself in the so-called linkage theory. This theory says that there is a kind of linkage between the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and all, just finished in a minute, and among all the other issues in the Middle East. And I believe we can separate the question of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and Syria and other conflict. However, as we know that the Middle East, then thinking is a little bit different from that. We can give our experience, or transition experience from 1989 in a very functionalist perspective. For example, we have laws on elections, party system. Maybe it is a part of our help, and to have the economics transition, and coming from the academia, education is the most important. This is the last point. I just collected several public opinion polls from the Arab countries, which is readily accessible from the internet. It's from 2013. The question was about the positiveness of the Arab Spring, and it is somehow positive for the public. Still positive, more than 50% say that very positive or positive to some extent, which is not bad, but I don't want to show all those public opinions, because you can find on the internet by Pew and by other agencies. But the conclusion, in my opinion, the most realistic scenario is, unfortunately, I'm critical, and even we don't like to use the term democratization. area experts started to use a kind of post-democratization discourse in the Middle East, even before the Arab Spring, and maybe better to use political transformation to better understand the region, because in our mind is there democratization, but in the Middle East is much more different. And I think EU and V4 countries have very limited influence on internal affairs, but we still have a kind of influence with humanitarian assistance, education, and with different aspects. Thank you very much.